So today I want to talk about what I think is the key piece that most manifestation teachers leave out, and in so doing, completely like warps the whole idea of manifestation. And what is that? So, what I tell my coaching clients is that if you have hired me as a coach, that implies on some level that you are playing some kind of game, right? When most of us hear the word coach, we think of a sport, and athletes have a coach to help them tap into their potential and, in so doing, become the best version of the athlete that they can and thereby win the game. So, a key component of any game, well, first of all, there's the rules, and for sure, there are rules to this game of life, whatever sector of the game you're playing. So, a lot of my coaching clients are divorced moms going through court, representing themselves pro se, and that is like the game that they're focusing on. And in addition to there being rules, like we know there's court rules, obviously we are playing this game through a spiritual framework. So there are universal spiritual laws at play, like, for example, the law of balanced forces. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Um, Energetic laws, okay, so we have to work within those. And also, with any game, there's an opponent, right? It would be silly to play tennis without an opponent. Now, in tennis, you don't hate the opponent. You're grateful for the opponent because the opponent is there for you to sharpen your own skills against, right? If you are a star tennis player, you don't want an opponent who is like, just some mediocre, I don't know, get together with the girls after work and meet up at the courts. No, like you need somebody who's at your level. So when we are engaged in a court battle, it's super natural to think of our opponent as opposing counsel or the opposing party, aka our ex. But I want to present to you that, in fact, this is not the case. The true opponent, true energy to overcome here is the dynamic or pattern that exists within this context. Let me explain. So, if you've read the book Transurfing Reality, chapter 2 talks about energetic pendulums. And in Kabbalah, we would call these klipot, but the mental imagery of a pendulum really works for me because of the motion of it, right? It's something that has momentum. And we are surrounded by these pendulums that hook us in because they demand to be fed, they demand energy in order to remain in motion. And whenever we get triggered, whether it's something internal or external, something that sends us off spiraling into a familiar thought pattern, that's another simile for pendulum is pattern. But again, I like pendulum because you can picture it. Me personally, I think in images, and I think a lot of people do actually, especially in the manifestation world. But in any event, so when our ex does something that triggers us, and whatever that trigger is, and by the way, this is why it's really important to know what story pops up when this happens, because unless we're really familiar with the pendulum and the old story, we won't be able to recognize it and release it when it appears. We have to know what it is in order to spot it. Hopefully that makes sense. Like if I told you, I want you to look for a particular type of bird, and as soon as you see this kind of bird, you have to call me and tell me. If you don't know what the bird looks like you're not going to be able to spot it, right? Okay, that's kind of a silly example, but the other day, my teenage daughter was getting under my skin, and I kind of like offhandedly remarked to my son, um, so and so is, I'll just say the word, pissing me off. And he goes, no, she's not pissing you off. You're thinking about her and you're pissing yourself off. And I'm like, oh my gosh, brilliant. You're absolutely right. And so this is what we do with the people in our lives that we think are so irritating and, oh, I just wish they would disappear and they're a narcissist and all these things. And that might be true. But if it didn't bother us, then it wouldn't matter. So here's a very silly example. If you're walking down the street and some crazy person starts like accosting you about how silly your purple mohawk is, and they're like just unleashing this stream of insults about your purple mohawk and what kind of person would even get that type of haircut, and they must be so insecure and all these things, and you don't have a purple mohawk, you are not going to take offense or be offended or get defensive or really have any kind of reaction to this lunatic. At the most, you might wonder why they chose to target you for their, monologue, depending on what type of person you are. Maybe you think it's hysterical and just, laugh at them and like it will just bounce right off of you. But either way, it's not going to land. It's not going to stick. And on the other hand, let's say you had this new hairstyle that in fact was a purple mohawk, and you were like kind of insecure about what people would think about it, and would they like it, and would they judge you, and what if people didn't like it. In that case, then yes, this person would probably affect you very deeply. And even more so if it was someone that you cared about, whose opinion mattered to you for some reason. Even if it wasn't somebody that you particularly liked or respected, but you felt in some way that their approval was impactful for you, right? Like a boss who, yeah, you don't really like the boss, but you want them to approve of your work because you feel that that would be beneficial to you in some way. So hopefully, based on what I've just shared, you can see where it isn't what happens to us, it's our reaction to it. And the reason it's there is because and this is where I think most manifestation teachers are, this is the missing piece, which is, what is our purpose in this world? Why do we even exist? Well, according to Kabbalah, our purpose in this world was to become like the creator, to become the creators of our own experience. But that doesn't mean physically through inner intention. This doesn't mean that, oh, I'm going to be the creator of my own life, so I'm going to get a bunch of bricks and build a house. That could be part of it, but a very small part of it. It's to create our own experience deliberately through energy, and specifically the energy of our consciousness. And we can use the words energy, consciousness, aura, vibes, frequency, identity, all interchangeably, okay? We basically are creating ourselves. So in which case, identity is a really good term for this process. But how do we create ourselves? We do it by create our lives, I should say. We do it by becoming who we are, because we attract what we are. And I will give you a perfect example. 2 real estate agents. One has been in a sales slump, or maybe is just starting out and doesn't have confidence in their abilities, whatever the case may be. And they're going on a listing appointment, but they don't really have any self-confidence. They don't feel like, sorry, I just want to make sure it's still recording. It's always a drag when you record like a 20-minute video and then find out the mic wasn't on. Anyways, so this real estate agent going on the listing appointment is probably going to be very apprehensive. Their energy is going to be wobbly. It's probably, maybe if they have a really negative belief system, like, maybe they've been on 2 or 3 failed listing appointments and they've taken it really personally because they've attached all kinds of importance to it. And so they're already going into it, God forbid, thinking that they're going to fail, versus a very experienced agent who also like doesn't need the money, right? And therefore is like, hey, I've been on a million of these. A lot of the times it works out, a lot of times it doesn't. And either way, I'm fine with it. Like, it just is what it is. They're very in flow. They're not attached to any particular outcome. That's their identity. That's their self concept. That's their consciousness. Okay, so two agents, two totally different levels of consciousness. They are going to attract very different outcomes based on their energy. And even if, let's say they both got the listing, okay, obviously not the same listing because that wouldn't make sense, but the one who is insecure, even if they get it, they're still not going to feel good, right? It's actually going to magnify their anxiety because it they're gonna worry about losing it, and they're just like not a match. And the other agent has it, but they were fine before and they're fine after, right? They're not worried about losing it. It Sometime every once in a while you get a really difficult client, and if it happens, it happens. Um, and it's always working out for the best. But here's the key here, and this is what this has to do with the purpose of our lives. We get to choose who we are, how we show up, what energy we clothe ourselves in, so to speak. And it does take practice to, I shouldn't even say adopt a new identity, but really to remove the stuff that isn't us. Like the anxiety, the insecurity, the doubt, the fear, that isn't us. We think it's us, but it's not us. So really, it's not so much about creating ourselves as stripping back the layers of what isn't us. And this is the purpose of why we're here, in a nutshell, according to the Kabbalists. We came here to be creators, right? God is a creator, and we inherited that gene because we also wanted to be creators. We did not want to be passive um, receivers without having some skin in the game, so to speak. So, but we can't do it by force, right? Like, it has to be through these universal spiritual laws that we shape energy, we manage our consciousness, we let go of baggage, we rewrite old stories, we stop old pendulums and put new ones into place. You can't not be subject to pendulums because energy is, you have to, because otherwise you're just the Buddhist meditating on the mountain, right? You're not engaged in life. You're in the desert. You're stagnant. You're in this wasteland. Like, maybe you stopped some sort of negative pendulum, like an addiction or emotional reaction, but you haven't gotten onto a new ride yet. Deliberately, consciously, one that you prefer. So, What does this have to do with our court case and the idea of a game and all these things? So when your ex does something that triggers you, whether it's an email or interfering with some sort of holiday time or doctor's appointment or anything, and we have this reaction, we are getting caught up into this pendulum that wants to be fed. Again, the Kabbalists call it a klipot. You can call it patterns, and then we become conscious of it, and we get into a coaching program, or we read Transurfing Reality or some similar type of book, or Mental Diet or Neville Goddard, or whatever the case may be. And we're like, okay, I'm not going to get caught up. And we decide we're going to slow that down and eventually stop it and get onto, replace that with other thoughts and write a new story. That's wonderful. But at a certain point, the old story is going to try to hook you back in. It's like you're starving the old story, and now it's going to become more insistent because it wants to be fed, and it's having these death throes. You know how, like, sometimes when somebody's dying, they rally like shortly before the end comes, and it's the same way with if you have a 3-year-old, right? And every time you go to the grocery store, the 3-year-old starts to whine and become fussy. So you're like, okay, I'll buy you a candy bar. And now the 3-year-old expects it. It expects to be fed. And then at a certain point, you're like, this really isn't healthy. I don't want to train my kid that every time they complain that they're going to get candy. And um, I'm just not going to do this anymore. So the next time it happens, you don't give them the candy bar. And what happens? Do you think they're just like, oh, okay, I guess, that doesn't work anymore? No, they get louder. They become more insistent. Psychologists call this an extinction burst. Like right before something goes extinct, it really ramps up in intensity. And if if you are divorcing a narcissist, you might have witnessed that. By the way, this is when women leave abusive relationships if they aren't doing it consciously, energetically, with these manifestation principles in mind. They will say that when she leaves the relationship is the most dangerous time, because that pendulum, that energy dynamic, which appears to be the ex, right, the offender, the abuser, is losing control, and violence, the probability of violence is the highest when she is actually leaving. Or if you've left someone and that's all of a sudden when they really try to suck you back in. I think they call it hoovering. You know what I'm talking about. But this happens internally too. Like somebody decides to stop eating sugar and all of a sudden they crave sugar in a way they never have before. Or they detox, they go through detox, like a juice cleanse or something, or they're quitting some kind of drug or medication, and all of a sudden, like, they've got all these really terrible symptoms. And they were like, oh my gosh, I made this commitment and now it seems like I made the wrong choice. And this is where we get tripped up. It's like, oh, I filed this motion in court and now I don't know if I'm strong enough. This is the old story, trying to stay alive, the pendulum trying to hook you back in. And this is where it's really crucial to to recognize it and make a different choice. And just well, here's the thing. Once you recognize it and you shine light on it, the light of awareness, then it just naturally starts to dissolve. And you don't really have to do anything else, because once you're aware of it, that, and like they tell kids, name it to tame it when it comes to your big feelings. Well, why is that so? Well, it works for adults too. I mean, we're all kids, obviously, but why is that so effective and powerful? Because it forces us to be aware. It's not so much the naming it, although I do think that that element is also very helpful, as much as it is the mindfulness, the awareness, because we can't change anything we're not aware of, right? Like if a person is having some kind of health issue that, but they don't realize that it's connected to, like, every time they eat dairy they have some kind of immune response, then they can't fix it because they don't they haven't identified the problem, so to speak. Sorry, I'm just checking. I'm like super paranoid about my microphone. um so that's really what I wanted to communicate today, is that when we have decided to step onto the playing field of life and become in the game rather than just sort of sleepwalking through it and reacting and feeling like a victim, and that we aren't creators, that we don't have agency and power and the ability to manifest. And even if you've been in the manifestation world for quite some time, okay, I'm going to turn my car off because it's like really hot in here. A lot of people will say to themselves or say to me, I totally get how manifestation works when it comes to money, because I can believe that money is abundant and limitless because it's an energy, right? And I don't have scarcity mindset when it comes to money, or when it comes to dating partners, or, I mean, obviously some people are trying to manifest a specific person, and in that case we are only talking about one person. But that's actually probably a really good example. Because when people are trying to manifest a specific court outcome, they're like, well, what they're also trying to manifest an outcome, and who's going to win? And that's not. I'm going to make a separate video about redefining winning, but the the key here is to understand that winning is about becoming the independent manager of your own frequency and pulling that energy out of the 3D reality, which already been manifested, which we give power to. I mean, this is like idolatry in its purest form, is we have manifested these circumstances around us by default, unconsciously, without any awareness, thinking that it was just happening to us, and then giving power to these manifestations and expecting them to give back to us, which is silly because we are the operant power, so to speak. So, and not like in this egoic, controlling way, which a lot of people do come to the manifestation because of in a desperate state of lack, and sort of like accidentally the ego sort of hijacks the ideas and tries to manifest from this, again, this constricted egoic, lack place, which does not work. You cannot manifest from lack. You can only manifest more lack from lack. But to really acknowledge that by following the steps properly, that we are in real time creating our own experiences. But the way to do that is not to react. So this is what I mean by being a manager of energy, because when we react to something, we give it energy, we energize it, we feed it. All right, good or bad, by the way. So when something happens that we don't like and we shout no at it, we are actually, it's like pushing the pendulum even harder. Okay. um and so when we recognize the reaction and we don't now this doesn't mean we don't respond, right? You get that triggering email and then you decide what is the appropriate response. So how do you do that? Again, this is like the missing piece I think that most schools of manifestation miss, is the response should be in alignment with the creator. Because keep in mind, we came to this world, again, according to the sages of Kabbalah, to become the creators of our own reality. We do that by managing energy. But how do we become the creator? We emulate the attributes of the creator. So what would God do? How would God respond to this abusive email from your ex? Well, number one, God loves all of his creations. So he wouldn't hatefully condemn them or abuse them, but he wouldn't enable them or coddle them either. And there's no scientific formula to this. You just have to feel it. Like the highest version of you, how would the highest version of you respond? Well, the highest version of you is compassionate, but also you aren't going to enable somebody to continue to be abusive, because that's not good for them or you. You're going to protect yourself and you're going to protect other people. Like when I was a cop and I would arrest people, that was protecting them, not just the people they were on their way to harm, but also the arrestee, because committing those acts is harmful to them. So, and that's why a lot of times in shaping our identity and trying to tease out how the highest version of ourselves would respond, I like the law enforcement example, because sometimes it is the most kindest, giving, sharing, loving thing is to say no. And to, it's like with our kids, we discipline them because we love them, right? And even though we don't invite everybody out there in the world into our own home, we still treat them with human dignity, because they are also vessels for the light of the Creator. They also have a divine spark in them. So by detaching, because God gave us free will, right? He doesn't have any skin in the game, so to speak, literally. I mean, he doesn't, he doesn't. Well, that's a weird thing to think about. But he doesn't coerce us to do anything. He doesn't control us. He creates invitations, which, if we're sensitive, we can pick up on. And he's always there talking to us, but we can't always hear it because we're so caught up in sometimes our own little mental dramas. But again, if we want to have that creative power and manage our own energy appropriately, then we need to we need to tap into that power of creativity by creating affinity of form with the Creator. And what do I mean by affinity of form? By emulating those attributes, we become similar. It's like we team up with God, all right? So if we're loving all of creation, then we are partners with the Creator. And what happens when you're partners with somebody? You have access to their talents, to their gifts, to their resources, to their abundance. You are tapping that flow. So the key that I I did not mean to ramble this long, but I really want to drive home the point that when we are involved in a coaching program and seeing ourselves as spiritual athletes, so to speak, it's not about crushing our opponent. It's about our inner opponent. That's what we want to overcome, those reactions, because thereby we are shifting our circumstances because we're changing our own energy. And when Joe Dispenza talks about like pulling your energy back out of external reality and pulling it into our internal reality, this is what he's talking about. Enriching our own energy is the key to everything, right? We pour energy into the 3D hoping to get something back on our investment, and that's not the way. We want to invest in ourselves. When we invest in ourselves and our own energy through meditation, through prayer, through elevating our consciousness, through energy work, through opening up those meridians, that is creating an aura of protection against unwanted circumstances coming in, right? Like, and nobody can buck your own current, by the way. When people talk about, oh, if I don't have money for an attorney, I don't have $50,000. Well, it doesn't matter. I have seen people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on attorneys and still not be happy because no attorney can buck your own frequency, your own energy, right? Which is, by the way, I think one of the things that is powerful about learning to go pro se is because it forces you to overcome your fears, to break your fears. And when you do that, because fear is a powerful pendulum, then because that naturally shifts your energy, you're learning something new. You're speaking up in court. You're learning how to detach from outcomes. All the things that good attorneys have to do. You're looking at the case objectively. It like all of the benefits are byproducts of the process. It's not about the outcome, which very often, and I would also say that family court is one of the hardest arenas to detach because it's our kids, right? Or or if it is money, a lot of times it's both. We're looking at assets as a finite pool of resources. So we're like, oh my gosh, it's my kids and my livelihood. How can I not be detached? Or I mean, sorry, how can I not be attached to a certain outcome? And logically, it makes sense. And a lot of times there's resentment that this person hurt me and is hurting the kids. And how do I detach from wanting justice for somebody who's caused so much pain? And I'm telling you, it's not that the emotional hook in of resentment and and even if we're really honest, is it justice or is it revenge, right? um that keeps us tied to that person, because speaking of similarity of form, now we are on their wavelength. Okay. The victim and the abuser are unfortunately on the same wavelength, because they both are looking to something in the 3D to fulfill them, rather than taking control of their own energy, right? Because we know abusers, it's all about power and control. But what is true power? It's There's a difference between power and force. Forcing someone, coercive control, that is force, okay? Um, that is covertly placing a gun to somebody's head, so to speak, manipulating, calculating. Um, Whereas true power, again, is power over our own reactions, which is like, well, what is that going to get me? That's going to get you everything, because our reactions, those pendulums, are what create the hardened into fact, see it, hear it, taste it, smell it, touch it world, circumstances of our 3D reality. So again, all of this is just to emphasize that the opponent is not a person. Okay. Um, uh, the opponent is these, if you want to call it an opponent, the is our reactions. It's these pendulums, that these forces of energy that make their way into what we see around us. So, okay, fine. I hope this was helpful. I hope your takeaway is that you are playing a game. So, on some level, lighten up, have fun, record your wins. Record your wins. Whenever you catch yourself and you're going to fall into old patterns and roll off into the ditch and roll around in the mud, and you stop yourself, oh my gosh, record the victory. I am telling you, and be aware of when that old story is popping up, the old self-concept, um, and get familiar with it. Okay, I'm going to make another video on identifying the old story and then writing the new story, and even especially for this week, depending on when you're watching this, but as I'm recording it, it's Sunday, February 1st. Energetically, because the Kabbalists say every Saturday night at around midnight, the energy in the cosmos shifts. And so the energy that is available to us over the next 7 days really is this energy of releasing the old story and just embodying and living the new one. All right, guys, thanks for watching. I love you, and if you want to learn about more ways you can work with me, you can head over to my website. The link is in the comments, and I think that's it. Okay, bye-bye.